So, as I said, my name's Arfon Hughes, and can you go to the next slide, please? So, I work as part of Natural Resources Wales in the North area. This slide shows you the 5 teams covering North area. So, on the far eastern side, you've got Wrexham and Flintshire. Then coming westwards, you've got Denbighshire, Conwy in the middle, Arfon and Mourne covering the Anglesey and Arfon, and then the patch I cover is the grey area of Meirionnydd and Dwyfor down there. Okay, just put it into context. So I'm going to be talking about how we utilise your data, but predominantly how my team is the main focus of this. How we use your data in my team really is the main focus. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is a breakdown. So you're focusing in now into the team area. All the red on that grey map you can see are sites of special scientific interest. So you can see the significant areas of SSSIs. So we use your data on those sites, but in addition to that, outside of those protected sites, we're consulted on various activities as well, and we give biodiversity advice and some information on what's available in those areas as well. So next slide, please. Okay, the way we access your data predominantly is through Aderyn. So we use this partner search facility in Aderyn, which allows us to see the data. We try and use NBN, but we have difficulties with the NBN mapping. So this has proved to be the most reliable way for us to have a look at your data. So it's a simple click box, and at the bottom of this search facility, there's a map that we can actually select polygons, and it takes a few seconds to pull all the data together. Next slide, please. And this is a sort of report that we get to see, like the one you saw of Conwy earlier on. So this is Dolgellau, and unfortunately, what it tends to show is the way I might walk to work or go for a recreational walk around town. Probably a lot of the river walks and a lot of the data in this particular is me going either to the office or going around for my tea mid-afternoon break or something like that, recording stuff. But you know, there's a lot of stuff out there, and at the moment, you know, I've moved from the Cofnod logging onto Lurk, and using that Lurk app's fantastic because it's so convenient, so easy, gets it down to a good resolution, and straight away I've cut out the extra work of having to log on and actually take from a notebook into the system. So it's an extremely quick way of logging data quickly, and it's there within a few weeks on the Aderyn system. Next slide, please. So what do we actually use your data for? So one of the main things that we use is consents and assents. So this is a permit for owner-occupiers and statutory undertakers to undertake works within the SSSI. So this could be a landowner who might want to graze the SSSI or clear some trees or install a fence or repair some walls. There's a list of activities on the SSSI they actually have to have permission to undertake. And likewise for power line companies, highways, water companies, network rails, and national parks, they need a form of consent as well, which is an assent, to allow them to do their activities. So some of these are power line clearances, highway upgrades, new pipelines, discharges, network rail along the coastal fringes, and also national park with some of their big projects like Celtic rainforest projects, £7 million projects. We issue permissions for them to remove invasive non-natives. So your data is absolutely critical because we get the request in and we actually look at the location, and we can actually tease out what information is there, and particular reference to the protected site features as well. Then for our own activities, we have a system under the Section 16 of the Environment Act, which allows us to have a management agreement with landowners, and we would look at the data that's in Aderyn, and then discuss with the landowner the potential for works that we can actually achieve some sort of favourable management to deliver for either species or habitats from that database. It's a really useful system. We are all the time getting planning consultations through our planning departments from local authorities, national parks, and one of the first things we look at is look at the proposal, the location, and then start to look to see what species may be impacted, and we'll feed that information back to the planning authority, and telling them what species need attention, really, either through sorts of environmental impact assessment to make sure that the activities are not damaging those features. So at the moment, I've got a large wind farm we've been working on. You might notice the Bamouth Bridge is being upgraded at the moment, so we were involved in the consultation for that. There's a big flood defence project at Llyn Tegid, just taking a lot of work at the moment, and also there's a lot of things like barn conversions for bat sites that come into us, and then there's the bypasses in Llanbedr and places like that. So we'll be involved in that sort of quite large consultation sometimes. Okay, next slide. Okay, and then the other aspect that often is forgotten is we help partners in developing their projects. So at the moment in Meirionnydd and Dwyfor, we've got about 36 projects running with various partners or groups, and this is, for example, the EU-funded LIFE project, the Celtic Rainforest. There's a draft Meirionnydd project going on. There's Heritage Lottery Fund projects, sustainable management schemes with Welsh Government's funding, and also NRW grants as well. The total at the moment of the 36 odd projects is about £33 million of works, and all those projects require some advice to tell them where the species are. We'll provide that information for them, and also if they're coming to us without the having developed the project already, we have to look at their activities to issue consents or permissions, and we'll look at the species at that point as well. A new aspect that came in with the new organisation in 2014-15 is abstractions and discharges, a different type of permit that NRW do. So there are numerous hydropower schemes around our area, Meirionnydd, about 90 of them, and quite a few of those are in rivers that are SSSIs. So all those schemes need to be assessed, and some sort of a we need to look at the species in those areas just to make sure that the scheme doesn't impact those species. But we also get a lot of septic tanks and discharges permits requests, so we look at the data on the therein to have a look at that. And then recently as well, when you have we're in a gold belt area, and there's several proposals for gold mining activities, so we look at the species records for that, and then advise on what species license might be required, and also what sort of research and then mitigation might be required to make sure the species is not impacted. So there's a lot of work gone into that recently. Another permit that we are consulted on is twofold really. So it's to do with rivers. One is within Main River. It's NRW's responsibility to issue a flood risk activity permit, and then on non-Main River, it's the local authority's responsibility to issue an ordinary watercourse consent. For both those permits, we are consulted on potential impact of new bridges, gravel removal, flood defences, flood embankments. So we'll feed into that permit what species are in the area, what sensitive species. Next slide, please. Okay, and there's quite a lot of not necessarily permitty stuff, but this is internal consultations. The first one happens to be a permit, which is a felling license. So whenever you apply for a felling license, they'll consult us, especially if it's on or near an SSSI, and we'll check the species at that time. Internally, all of NRW's plantations have to have a forest resource plan, what used to be called a forest design plan. Now that design plan works out when the trees are going to be felled and what to plant them afterwards, but also in the consultation process, we're able to flag up species issues, habitat issues, and the data you provide is proving to be really useful in trying to ensure that the activities of the plantations don't impact adversely on species or habitats in the area. We're also consulted on NRW's capital works. So this could be things like internal drainage districts, where they clear the ditches on a routine basis to ensure that the internal drainage doesn't flood, but also things like flood defence works. So if we have various assets in the area, and our assets team would actually undertake maintenance of those assets, sluice gates, flood banks, that sort of stuff, and they'll consult us and seek permission, so we use your data for that. And then we have several gravel gauges as well in some of the rivers, and regularly that sort of thing's clean. So that's another thing that we come along and have give advice on. NRW also, we have a lot of land, and we also dispose some of land. So we might sell it, we might set it on a tenancy, or buy a new bit of land. But also we might, so for example, in some of these purchases recently, there was a proposal to purchase a new bit of land at Cae Gwyn, which is up towards Trawsfynydd, and actually plant it up as a new plantation. Because of the data that was in Aderyn and that was gathered by yourselves, we were able to establish freshwater permits on the area, but also several Section 7 Environment Act Wales species and Section 7 habitats. And as a consequence, that site was purchased and it's now been managed as part of the NNR suite effectively. So that's really good. So the habitat's been conserved as long as the Section 7 species. And also there's recently another proposal to sell a bit of the land at Gaos, which is just down the road on the Mawddach here. And it's a top end of the Mawddach, fantastic views looking down the Mawddach estuary. But again, there were Section 7 species in there and habitats, and we were able to give the advice and to encourage to keep that area as open land, keep it within house and manage it as the Section 7 habitats. Another one is an internal one is statutory plant health notices. So this is when they have a Phytophthora issue. And if you go on to the next slide, I'll come back to that one in a minute. Okay, so some of the issues to be aware of. NRW due to austerity, we no longer have the breadth of expertise, and we also have smaller teams. So if you look at my team, we've lost 3 or 4 officers in my team, but doubled the area. And that's really an important factor in the importance of the data that you guys provide. So without your data, in the old days, we could have gone out 2-3 days a week and have a look at things, but we just haven't got that sort of time anymore. Since lockdown, particularly, we've noticed an increase in workload of about 40%, and that sort of increase in both people asking for permissions and asking for development has meant that officers are less often getting out, really. So that's impacting on how we get out. And also quite a lot of these consultations we get, sometimes in the worst case scenarios, we get a turnaround of about 5 working days to turn the response around. So if the data's not there, we just have to send the response up with whatever information we have. We haven't got the time to go looking for it all over the place and ask people for what information they have. And we do come across, unfortunately, the issue of resolution of the data that's in the database. Data at 1 kilometre it suggests something there, but we're not able to use it in casework, unfortunately. And if it's down at 10 feet at a good reference, that's fantastic. So, a lot of data, if it's not at the right resolution, we will miss things and things will happen, unfortunately. And then also, things that can cause some issues is delays in verifying data and also transferring from the various databases into a system that we can actually see. And at the moment is Aderyn. Next slide, please. So come back to the statutory plant health. So these are some of the issues we had. So recently had a consultation. So this was an NGO who had a statutory plant order to fell a whole load of larches, and the officer in NRW responsible for these notices was informed by the landowner that pine martins were on site. So he contacted me. I had a look at Aderyn, couldn't find any records of pine marten on that site. So the individual went back to the landowner. Luckily, in this particular case, although they hadn't submitted any data to anywhere, so we could actually have a look at it, they did have video footage. So in this case, the trees can stand for a while until they've sorted something out. So, but there was a scenario here. If they didn't have the data or something to corroborate it and verified on a database, they would have had to employ an ecologist to prove that the pine marten were there. So it's quite important and could save somebody a lot of time and efforts if the data is recorded and verified on the systems. Next one, please. So this is a permission for a car park in the middle there. You can see on the OS map the car park, the access route in, and NRW wants to clear the visibility through into the car park because we're experiencing a lot of difficulties with illegal activities, feces in the wood behind trees. It's quite unpleasant, and some of the characters that were camping there were very unpleasant, to say the least. So the request came into us to fell some of the trees to open up the sight lines into the car park here. We checked the database, and as you can see, there's 1 dot for lichens in this particular area. We couldn't find any more information to verify the location, so we issued a consent, and trees were felled. About 2 weeks later, a lichenologist came to us and said, you felled all the trees with the lichens on them. We asked if they knew where this data, where the data was, and it was effectively in the notebook of this individual and hadn't been submitted to data. So it comes down to, if you have it in your notebook, submit it. Otherwise, you can assume pretty much that there's a risk of it not being there the next time you go and have a look at it. Okay, next slide, please. Likewise, this is a case where NRW came to us for a request to undertake an activity on the site. We checked the database. There was no issues, and we responded to the individuals, allowing them to go ahead to do the activity. About 2 weeks later, I was reading the Welsh Ornithological report, and in there was reference at the particular location in this area of a Schedule 1 species. Knowing the type of species it was and the activity was undertaken and where it was, I'm pretty confident that that nest site was trashed in the activity. And I know from looking at the database recently to double check that species hasn't been there since that activity was undertaken. So obviously the Welsh Ornithological report, to collate that data, it was collated at some point to submit into that report, but it wasn't submitted into the local rec centre into the database. And that was quite a nice species, unfortunately, and that's, as far as I'm aware, has been lost in that locality. Next slide, please. This is something that some of you might be aware that I've been looking into. So this is Sitka spruce distribution. Before November last year, there was about 43, 46 records of Sitka spruce, and really the resolution was at 1 kilometre square. Over the last year, we've increased that data set in this search area to over 950. And the main thing is, if you go into the next slide, please. You can, once you go down to that sort of resolution, you can start to see where the issue is and what you need to address to try and sort it out. So here you have a plantation next to Llyn, and you can see the distribution of conifers, and all that is Sitka coming onto the site. But and a lot of the scientific evidence from forest research suggests they're looking at distribution from plantations of about 80 meters, at most 1 kilometre. Some of the Norwegian stuff does stay 2 kilometres, but the stuff at the top end is going up towards 6 kilometres. So when we're recording conifers on sites like this individually, we're recording the location, the habitat it's on, and also the height that the trees are on. And what you can find from this site when you look at the data, the stuff that's at 4 to 6 kilometres is pretty much a uniform height at 6 meters to 7 meters height, whereas down by the forestry edge, that stuff is as you'd expect, sort of a constant seeding. And the suspicion is that the tall stuff at the end happened at some sort of storm event, a southwesterly hitting that lake, flying up the slope of that plantation and blowing the seed all the way up. Now that sort of information I'm currently trying to draft into sort of a scientific paper, because the implications are that we need to address some of these plantations and locality to address, and the same sort of pattern I'm seeing on Cadair Idris and the Berwyn as well, where there's a dispersal rate much further than all the previous evidence is showing, and suggestion is that it's due to storm events. And also by recording the habitat the species is on, we're able to discern the risk associated with certain habitats. So for example here, Blanket Bog and Dry Heath is predominantly where this stuff seeds into, whereas on acid grassland you just don't get it seeding in. So we're able to use that data very usefully. Next slide, please. Okay, this is Canada geese in the area, and recently, really this year, I was just looking at some of the issues when I was going out. I was primarily going out to try and do some dragonfly recording, but I did find a lot of issues with Canada geese, and quite a lot of the data is on 1 kilometre square. And if you zoom into the next slide, so what I've tried to do, these dots, most of these dots are my dots, and you can start to see at Cadair Idris and down at Cregennau Lake that the dots are effectively breeding sites for the Canada geese, and it's showing them turning up at pretty much all the upland lakes and ponds. And if you think of Cregennan Lake, that's probably the best oligotrophic, nutrient poor lake in the whole of Wales. And recently there's about 30 to 40 Canada geese sat on top of that. So at the moment, I'm looking to collate as much information of Canada geese in the area from either both webs, but also the breeding locations to try and work out, have we got a problem on all these upland sites? So anecdotally, people are telling me that they've seen them across the Meirionnydd and various other upland sites, but nobody's been recording them because some of these species, you can see there, Meirionnydd has just got very few records, but I'm aware, locally that people have seen them. So we've skipped on to pheasants. This slide here is in relation to pheasants. Again, it's an under-recorded species, and yet I've been asking my staff to record them around Harlech there, and you can see a cluster of individuals records up there. The reason I'm looking at that is we found nests in the sand dunes and in the same locations where you've got things like sand lizards. And down to the south of Berwyn, there are release sites of about 60,000 birds down there. And if you go down towards the Brigandine and Mallwyd, you can see hundreds on a particular day just killed along the roadside. But if you go and look at the sites where they're released, they're digging into anthills, they're scraping the vegetation and also killing invertebrates and all sorts of stuff. So, I mean, I suspect we're seriously underestimating the amount of some of these species. And, if you're looking to control the activities of this sort of stuff, if we haven't got the data, then and the impact that these things are having, we're not able to do anything about it really. So it's something I'm keen to try and progress, is try and collate some more information on some of these lesser recorded species really. Next slide, please. Okay, so the data we need, a lot of it is kept on NBN and Aderyn, but even as Roy was telling you, that we still have a lot of data on files, reports. Only just before lockdown, I received a box about that big, full of 30 years of card records, which needs to be mobilised. That had been lost for the best part of 20 years in an attic. We've managed to get hold of that now, but we still have data on WordPerfect, Quattro Pro, Excel, Recorder, MapInfo, ArcGIS, and then internally we have some of our own forester and fish database as well, and I think some of that is being mobilised, but there's still issues there. But also I'm aware as well that some of our partner organisations still have large databases that are not shared with local record centres. And I was talking to one of the partner organisations only yesterday, and some of those sites, nature reserves, you could say that some of them are just black holes in the database. They're either not shared or they're shared at a resolution of 1 kilometre, and that's something that really would be fantastic if we could address. And the other thing is, it comes back to things like Canada geese, invasive species, pheasants, that sort of stuff. Often it's not recorded. Next slide, please. Okay, so please, record as much as you can, and use the lurk system and get it down to six-figure grid references. You never know what might be useful. So I'm not in this context of this, I just want to say that we really appreciate the effort that recorders and verifiers go into it. It's I'm a recorder myself, and I know how much work that goes into it. But please, keep up the good work. And despite everything, we really need your data. It's really useful stuff. Thank you. Next slide, please. And that's it from me. Thank you.